To discuss this more, I'm joined from Washington by Mike Billington with the Asia Desk of Executive Intelligence Review. Welcome to the programme, sir. Mr. Billington, how much do you expect the current escalations to turn into a war?
Well, it's unfortunately very possible. Not the way it's generally thought of, however. The Chinese response to this has been very precise, very accurate. They've warned repeatedly that there are provocations coming from North Korea, which they've encouraged them to stop, but that there are also very severe provocations coming from the U.S. And the Chinese have good reason to understand that this is an encirclement of China, that the massive hardware that the U.S. has put into the area is beyond anything needed to deal with the North Korea threat. And therefore, the idea that some sort of spark in North Korea could be used for a broader confrontation has to be taken seriously, especially since, as you know, the U.S. has refused to make any kind of agreement with Russia to stop the deployment of their anti-ballistic missile systems around the Russian border in Europe. And we're doing now the same thing in Asia, claiming that it's about North Korea, just as they claim in Europe that it's in response to Iran, which has no threat, no weapon. So this is perceived correctly by Russia and China as a threat to them, whose purpose is to get them to back down to the regime change policy, the new colonial policy being driven by London and by London's puppet in the White House, Obama. Locklear, I would somewhat correct what you said. I mean, what you said is accurate. But Locklear made the point that, of course, we could take down a Korean missile, but he was being pushed by John McCain, a manic war hawk who wants to go to war. And he said explicitly we would not shoot at a Korean missile, which was simply a test or going into space. We would only do so if it appeared to be actually aimed at Japan or Guam or Korea or something.
Indeed.
Which I think is important. The military is standing in the way of the war plans coming out of London and out of the White House.
Indeed, but how much do you think that the North Korea's recent anti-American rhetoric will change the regions, the Korean Peninsula's political and economic dynamics?
Well, they want talks. They want talks with the United States. You probably saw the pictures today. North Korea was celebrating Arbor Day. People were out planting trees and dancing in the streets. General Dempsey, the head of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, has repeated over and over again, there is no sign that North Korea is preparing a war, mobilizing their forces. They are, it appears, about to carry out a missile test, and that will be declared to be against UN regulations and so forth. And I think North Korea is saying we're going to do something like a missile test, and if, in fact, we are fired on as a result of this, there's liable to be a war, which is why they put out that rather strange warning telling foreigners to leave South Korea. Not because they're going to attack South Korea. They're not crazy. They act irrationally. They act in a bellicose ways, often, for reasons that we could discuss if we had more time. But Russia and China are encouraging them to cool off. But they're not crazy. They're not going to start a war in which they'd be destroyed, their regime would be abolished, and so forth. So this is, you have to look at this in the broader context. The greatest global financial breakdown crisis in the history of Western civilization, an open confrontation being forced on Russia and China over the regime change policy being advanced by Obama, working openly with al-Qaeda, Saudi-backed al-Qaeda forces throughout the Middle East, and potentially now moving into Asia with the same belligerence.
Indeed. Well, many thanks to Mike Billington with the Asia Desk of the Executive Intelligence Review from Washington.